Welcome to Crimson Guitars and welcome to a tutorial video. I think we're calling this one From Timber to Tunes. I'm going to take you through building a fairly basic guitar, and this is aimed at somebody with a limited space, limited number of tools. I'm going to be doing it predominantly using hand tools and handheld machines. So we're going to have a router, a spindle sander, probably a router table, jigsaw. I'm not going to use a bandsaw to cut any of the parts out for the guitar. And I'm going to be building it out of readily available pre-sized timber. So while at Crimson we've got a full massive factory floor available to process down almost an entire tree, I'm basically aiming this at somebody who has used the wonders of the internet to order everything required. And we have the plans available probably to download. And if you follow along, I'm hoping that I'll be able to explain this and yeah, keep the whole process as simple as possible. Before I get going on any project like this, especially if I'm using a lot of hand tools, I will go through the whole load and sharpen everything up. There's nothing more dangerous or problematic than trying to build anything with a tool that isn't absolutely right for the job. A perfectly sharp chisel or plane will always do a better job. I have got a top here. This is pre-prepared, book-matched piece of flame sycamore, and I need to joint it. So I've bought it. I've bought it from one of my luthiers downstairs. In your case, you've bought it from a timber supplier, and it is pre-thickness to about 5 millimeters, and we need to glue it together. So make yourself a shooting board. It's very simple. A substrate piece of flat plywood or MDF if you want, and then you have a raised section on one side and a stop. And essentially what I do, or what you should do, is rest your wood up against the stop and it's raised up, and then you use a joint plane on its side to cut a perfect 90-degree cut. And essentially if you do that a couple of times, you should end up with a perfect joint. It's a little bit more fiddly than that in practice. You have to make sure that your blade is perfectly square, and in fact, because I've taken this out and sharpened it, this one isn't. If your blade isn't poking through the bottom of the plane perfectly square, then you're going to end up with a not 90-degree cut. So there we go. You'll see I was feeling where the blade is with my fingers, trying desperately not to slice the tips of my fingers off. That's another tip you should probably listen to. Now, as I'm pushing the plane over the wood, there are several things. First of all, I've checked to see which way the grain is going on the timber. Now, in this case, it's pretty much all over the place. So it starts with me cutting into end grain here, and the rest of it is pretty much I'm going with the grain. If you're always cutting into end grain, it's going to tear out and cause issues. So try not to. We'll keep the piece of wood about 5 or 6 mil off the edge. Planing 101, and this works on jointer planes as well actually. The toe of your plane is what actually creates the joint. So that is where the flat begins. And then your blade cuts away and the rear of the plane follows the flat that you've just created. Now, if you keep on pushing down on the toe of your plane, you're going to end up with a massive curve. So as I go along, I'm putting the pressure on the front, just hold that there. And you've got to be square. Put the pressure on the front, and about halfway down, I move my arm back, and I'm then putting the pressure on the flat section that the front of the plane has created for me. And that works whether you're doing this kind of a joint or if you're using a plane in a more traditional manner. Now, a perfectly sharp plane should give you a nice gloss edge. And then we do the same on the next one. Okay. So if we're lucky, that should be perfect. One thing I've actually missed that I should have done beforehand is mark out which is the book match side and which isn't. So let's just, there we go. Now, clamps are wonderful things. With enough pressure, one can glue pretty much anything to anything. However, as a general rule, if you can, just with the pressure of your fingers, hold a joint together, then it's a good joint. You can also feel, so that there, I can actually feel and hear that it's touching. Over here though, I have a little bit of a gap. Now I could clamp that closed and hope and pray that once it's glued up it's not going to ping open at some point, but we don't do that. The big trick that you want to do, we don't now know where the gap is. It could be on either side, it could be in either piece of wood, and holding it on something flat, move the wood away. Now here I still have a gap, which means that the gap is in this half of the wood. If I do it this way and I don't have a gap, which is the case, it's obvious that the gap isn't here. And that there is a simple trick that will change your life if you do this regularly. And if we're lucky, that's all it took. That's all it needs, sorry. It's almost a Tupperware squeak. And there we go. We have a perfect joint, without the need for huge clamping pressure. You won't need more than 3 sash clamps. You shouldn't even need 2, really. With a good joint, you should be able to put glue on it, rub it together, and then just leave it. And the vacuum created by rubbing it together should suck it together and you'll have a good joint. That being said, I've only done that once to prove a point, and it was fun proving the point. Use clamps. Okay, so we're prepared. I know the joint is good. I've got the clamps roughly to the right positions. This wood isn't exactly perpendicular. The edges are a little bit funny, but that's not an issue. Now, as you tighten the 2 bottom clamps up, what it wants to do is make the wood ping open, and we don't want that. I'm going to put glue on, push it down so it's perfectly flat on the base, on the the center of the clamp, the body of the clamp, there we go. And then very gently tighten it up. This clamp goes on top and stops it from pinging. And you really do not need very much pressure at all. You do, however, need glue. What a sound effect. Okay, same old. Put the glue on one side, rub it together. This both spreads the glue and creates a slight vacuum. Very gently clamp it together. And I'm using my finger to run across and see if I've got a nice square joint. I don't want too much of a lip because I'm going to have to, well, get rid of that in a minute. So this clamp isn't really, it's not really necessary. Or very cooperative, for that matter. There we go. One guitar top glued up. If you're doing this for the first time, you will have spent a lot longer than that sharpening your plane, making a shooting board of some sort. But if you are planning on doing this more than once, the shooting board is absolutely essential. You really, really do need one in your life. Other than that, well, I need to go and have some coffee and let this cure. So, fun times. Have a coffee. Food and caffeine. More important than sharp tools, almost. Anyway, I have a stunning piece of wood. I set this aside for a personal build 2 years ago now and haven't had the time to build it. But anyway, here we go. So it's English ash and it is spalted. So bacteria have started eating it, and then in the process of drying the timber out, that bacteria has been put into a state of hibernation. If the wood becomes damp again, and in a damp, warm environment, it will start eating it again and rot. But for now, it's beautiful, and I need to joint it. So, same old process, figure out where the grain is going, and of course, yet again, I've got grain going that way and that way. 2/3 of it going here. Now, this has come to me fairly straight and square, so I'm only going to really need to just touch it. Just a little bit with my jointing plane. Number 7, absolutely awesome. Basically, this guitar is going to have an ash body and a flame maple top. The pretty side of the body is going to be on the back. There we go. So that's working a little bit better. Okay, When you're testing a joint to see whether it's fitting or not, the feel and getting that sort of Tupperware squeak is almost more important. If you can see a gap, then you're definitely going to feel it. So I'll push down from each corner, see if there's any rock, feel if there's pressure and tension in there, and only if there is do I actually go and see if I can see any small gaps at all. And well, I'm very lucky. That's pretty much spot on. Which means I can joint her up and be done. So this has been curing for a couple of hours and is pretty much sorted. Yes, I have lost the lid to my glue, and I will find it by the time the day is done, but it's actually vaguely embarrassing. What can I say? Always spread your glue out properly. In the case of one of these joints, you can just use the other side of wood. If you're doing a big surface joint, spread it out with a glue spreader of some sort. I'm in the habit of using three clamps like this. It's not absolutely necessary. And there we go. Wipe away the excess. Get it all over your fingers. And this just makes life a little bit easier further on down the road, but also allows me to visually check that my joint is working all right. Okay. Time to move on to the neck. Now, this neck blank has been provided 19 millimeters thick, which is pretty much exactly what we require to make an F-type guitar. And whatever the arguments are for or against a flat headstock, this is a simple way of making an instrument. Anyway, I need to decide where I want this neck to actually be situated, and further up is better. Now, I'm not going to show you how to make a template. You can download these plans, and from the plans you will be able to make a template. It's download the plans, print them, glue them onto a piece of MDF or plywood, and basically file and plane away until you've got something that is accurate. You will get a better result if you use a bobbin sander, oscillating spindle sander. Why are they've got two names? It's crazy and distractingly annoying. that'll give you a good result, and then planes on the flatter sections. As long as your template is square and right, then the guitar will be as well. You can buy templates various places as well that come ready to use, and template making is one of those things. I personally really do not enjoy it. I'd much rather get on to the building of the actual guitar. But there we go. Okay, so I've drawn around the template. I have got my center line, and this is where we really have to start thinking a little bit more. Up to this point, it's just been fairly basic woodwork. Now, there's my nut line and my center line. In instrument making, the center line is be all and end all. The actual thickness of your nut can vary a certain extent. The actual thickness, the actual width at the body end can vary slightly. Parker use a 57 mil or even more joint at the 22nd fret. Fender use a 55. The Parker means a little bit more room and it feels more comfortable. But if it's off center, stuff starts going wrong. Okay, so double check that. I'm actually happy because I know this template, having used it before, and that's not a problem. Next up is the truss rod. Now, check out all parts. I've actually run out of all parts truss rods, so this one is a different version with a slightly wider head. Now, I want the adjustment to be just underneath the inside line of the nut. So my nut is going to sit here, and that sits there. And I'm drawing out how long I need my truss rod to be. And essentially, that is the first job. Now, there are many different ways that you can do this. And that's just woodwork for you. If I really fancied it, I could chew that out with a 1/4-inch chisel and a mallet. That's quite tempting. Bang, bang, bang. And just hope you don't go through the back. I, however, am going to use a router, and I'm also going to play around a little bit with the track, because these are fun. Now, I have a template that I used for many years that sits on there, and you use a guide bush and go in. But you've got to fix the template onto the guitar somehow. And that essentially means drilling somewhere where you might not have wood or into the headstock. And that's not really good. Now, I'm going to screw the neck down so that doesn't move. And then from there, I'm going to use Triton's other way around. Track, which then allows the router to move straight and square. I love it. These things are actually acting as stops, basically. fraction longer than I need it to be. All right. There's no need to check. I always check to see whether a machine or tool is turned on before I plug it in. With these, I wouldn't have been able to change the router bit if it had been turned on. There's a physical stop so that you can't destroy the motor while it's all locked off, which is innovative and cool. And off we go. And there we go. That works really well. So we're a little bit deeper than we require. I have to chisel that out because the head of the truss rod is ever so slightly wider. By ever so slightly, I mean like 15 or 20% more, which I've never understood. What is the point? Just to make life difficult for luthiers. There we go. Truss rod in place, flat side up. This is a dual action truss rod. And the time has come to cut it out. Normally I would go and find a bandsaw. I'm going to use a jigsaw this time because I'm trying to use tools that you could actually use in your kitchen. Jigsaw. The meatiest jigsaw I've ever held in my life. I'm going to do this in several stages. I have only once in my life used a jigsaw to cut out a guitar. I know it is possible, and yeah, this is an experiment, and yeah, fun. Anyway, where are we? Clamp, ear defenders. This feels naughty. For verisimilitude, I probably should have done this in my kitchen at home. Next time. Okay, when you're doing that, leave enough room for wobbles, as it were. If you're going to use a router table to build your neck, which we are, I think we're probably going to use a router table, then you want it to be as close as you possibly can, but also a jigsaw is inherently unstable, or at least less stable than a bandsaw. So you're actually, because of the way I was holding this off the edge, I was only resting on one face of the foot of this. I'm ever so slightly off angle, and I could run the risk of making it too small. I haven't, but bear that in mind when you build your guitar. One guitar top. one other side of one guitar top. Okay, I need to plane this flat. This is the gluing surface, and this is the front. I should probably label it. Front, you fool. The amount of times from the front it is book matched, so everything matches up nicely, all the flaming, etc. On the gluing surface it is slightly off, and you can always tell who's not been really concentrating by how well the book matches come out. But I need this to be flat, not necessarily absolutely perfect, but flat. Now it presents a problem. How does one flatten a piece of wood this big but also relatively flimsy? I could take it downstairs and use a sander thicknesser, which is a fantastic machine and a time saver, and also relatively expensive and requires dust extraction and a workshop. If you're doing this in your kitchen, on your nice dining table or kitchen surface, I'm so tempted to do this kind of a build at home one day just for fun. I would be in so much trouble. Then that really isn't an option. Find yourself a nice flat surface, and you don't need to clamp anything to it. Okay. So, this is my masking tape and super glue trick. If you haven't seen our video on this, check out Crimson Guitar's YouTube and just search for the greatest luthiers trick ever, or some pretentious rubbish like that. We use this almost all the time. Masking tape on the surface to which you want to hold. Can you tell I'm concentrating on what I'm saying to you and not on what I'm actually doing? That's the side I want to plane. This is the side that needs tape on it. Start again. It all comes out in the edit, or all stays in the edit for comedy value. Okay, so you can see I've got it on the table. I've matched up these two lines to what's on my kitchen table. Burnish it down a little bit, which means that the tape is holding onto the wood better. What I don't want to do, however, is super glue my wood to my workbench, because that would just be painful and awkward. Super glue on one side, accelerator on another, and then you line them up, hopefully perfectly. There we go. Now, when I first saw this trick, the apprentice who showed it to me was derided, and I laughed at him and said, that would never hold anything. If I did the same trick and, say, used it to fasten a plane to my bench, I would be able to pick up the workbench or knock it over without removing the joint. It is very strong. We use this on the CNC machines to hold instruments to CNCs, and they do not move. Engineers use this all the time. It's a really, really, really cool trick. But it's especially suited for guitar building, because I'm able to hold super thin veneers, 1 mil, 1 mil instead of 6 even, and it works perfectly. So anyway, now, we have two pieces of wood with differing grain orientation, for one, and it's also quite flat. Okay, so you've just seen that masking tape and super glue take enough sideways pressure to, well, nearly knock my workbench off, which is very useful. But it comes away very easily when you are pulling upwards. And what's more, I've heard you for the last 5 minutes saying, why aren't you using double-sided tape, Ben? Do you not know it exists? And the reason I'm not using double-sided tape is because it always leaves a horrible residue. Almost always. There are some very good expensive ones, probably made by 3M, because all the good sticky stuff is, isn't it? But this masking tape, super glue, easily accessible, cheap, in every workshop. And, well, it just does this job so very well. There we go. No residue, no super glue anywhere. And I have a perfectly jointed flat surface. Onwards and upwards, we have a body to joint. Okay, so we have a less pretty side. This is the top. We have a very pretty side. This is the back. We need to joint this top section and get it ready to be joined with the top. Same process. Spot on. Okay, body blank, jointed. The ugly side, the pretty side. I've been looking forward to using this wood for a while. Okay, so I'm using the template, align the center line up, and I don't actually need to draw around it because I'm about to glue something right there. So what the point of that was, I do not know. The top needs to line up with the center line perfectly as well. And I have a slight problem with that, in that my top is actually bigger than the body. Now, where I want it to be is actually there. So I'll line that up there. And flip that over. Okay, that's perfectly lined up. The problem is, while that is perfectly lined up, the second I put glue on there, it's going to move, it's going to slip and slide, and we will have center lines that don't match up. And that is always annoying. Toothpicks to the rescue. Awesome little things. Okay, 2mm drill bit. In several places, away from where the body is going to be. Or in other words, in part of the blank that you are going to cut away. We now have 4 locating pins. 2 probably would have been enough, but 4 locating pins are going to help us as we do the gluing up. And that's it. Now, I'm in a moral quandary here. I could do the lazy thing and teach you a bad habit, or not. We need a clamping call, and the template is just about exactly perfect, except for the fact that if I clamp too hard onto this, it will be ruining a template. So yeah, I'm just going to go for it. Why not? Come on. Let's get some glue and some clamps. Not too much pressure. You don't need loads of pressure. As I said earlier, if your joint isn't good without minimal pressure, then it's just not a good enough joint and you have to go back and plane it some more. Okay. I tend to cut giant saw notches in my glue spreaders. It just helps. And this is the point of no return. It is now that you find that you've put it on the wrong side, or somebody comes in and asks you to do something else. Or, in fact, now that I've said that, I'm just waiting for somebody to come in. Phone call is a favourite. There you go. So, lined up that hole. Lined up that one. Crimson's fretting hammers are useful for all sorts. Okay, I'm not going to put loads of pressure on this. If you happen to have a bookbinder's press, that would be ideal. No. I would also, if we weren't under time constraints, and if we weren't using jigsaws rather than bandsaws, probably have cut a little bit more waste off than I have up to this point, just to allow my clamps a little bit more access. So there we go. I'm not putting loads of pressure on. Okay, that is the end of day one. Thank you very, very much for watching. We have jigsawed out a neck, routed the truss rod access, jointed the top and the back, and then glued those two separate pieces together. And that's actually a pretty good day's work. Now, tomorrow we will declamp the top, cut out, again with that jigsaw, cut out their final body shape, and we might actually end up with a complete guitar body finished, and we will probably start working on the neck. For now, we're going to concentrate on the body, cut that out, get all of the control access, the pickup cavities, etc. routed out, and essentially the body will be ready for fine sanding, at which point we can put it away. The neck, we need to get on the router table, get the final shape routed out, and glue the fretboard, which is a pre-slotted blank that we've already got. And we will basically end probably day 3 with a carved neck and a finished body, both ready for final shaping and sanding. Thanks for watching. Be back soon. Cheers.